The camera caught it. A shape, a breath, a scream. But there was no one there, because at Paranormal M we share the footage the world forgot. Well, I suppose we just read about it, but anyway, subscribe to see it, if you want to. I mean, hear it. Phantom Infestation. It started with a sudden collapse of normal life. One Monday morning, my boss simply vanished. No paycheck, no notice, nothing. In Germany, of all places, where laws usually click like clockwork, the court still seemed to shrug at my claim, even though others in the same case got their money. Then the world tilted further. Despite a strong resume and a market that should have favored me, every job application vanished. Months passed by, and my confidence seemed to thin. By late winter, the oddities sharpened. Bedbugs appeared in my apartment in January, deep winter. That's while I was traveling in Italy. My girlfriend had just entered my life around then, and she swears that she's spotless. Yet the bugs showed up off-season, like an omen that refused logic. Or like possibly something else. Yet, when we finally moved in together, things only deepened. She was a bright, unstoppable 18-year-old, but within weeks her joints betrayed her. First one knee, then the other, and soon her whole body ached without cause. A brief recovery would fade into a new mystery pain like a looping curse. And then came the roaches. Our place is practically surgical. No crumbs, no overflowing trash. And yet those slick brown shadows, they slip across her counters. Other signs seem to pile up. Bathroom mirrors, they fog in random ghostly patches. A damp, moldy scent flares and disappears, and if exhaled by unseen lungs, it would seem at least, but she scrubs until the tiles gleam, using Mr. Clean most normally. The smell, it always seems to ambush us. I tore up the baseboards, I checked every seam. I found only spotless emptiness. We're both pretty tired. Bone-deep tired. Not just sleepy, but drained. I tested a theory by spending 3 days in Hamburg. And there I slept like a child, and I woke pretty early. I worked hard. I partied late. I was buzzing with energy. The very day I returned home, heaviness closed in again. One former tenant, a serious man with no talent for jokes, he admitted that he sometimes found objects in places he'd never left them. Another hinted at quote-unquote something in the apartment. And lately, my girlfriend wakes to faint knocks or the scrape of something shifting in the dark near the kitchen. And sometimes she swears a shadow moves when nothing should be moving. I started this story as a skeptic. Not so sure anymore. Maybe it's some slow, hidden infestation. Maybe something older and stranger. A parasite of the spirit feeding quietly on us both. Better than bedbugs. Painted shadows. I have a classmate who lives with borderline. Sorry, hitting too close to home for my life. I have a classmate who lives with borderline personality disorder, and once confided me about her recurring hallucinations. She described seeing things that weren't there. Tiny flickers in the corner of her eye and strange faces in empty rooms. I remember thinking it was unsettling, but it felt like something far from my own reality until a few days ago. It began one quiet evening. I was making brigadeiros. Don't know what that is, but it sounds tasty. The mixture was pale and smooth, yet suddenly it glittered with tiny neon specks like confetti trapped in sugar. They blinked in and out of sight as if it were alive. And when I finished cooking, the colors were gone, as though my eyes had been telling stories my mind didn't want to hear. Later that same night, I caught sight of a shape near the hallway. A dark silhouette, almost human but off, and its head was perfectly round, its mouth stretched into a grin that didn't belong there. I froze, expecting fear, but instead I felt a deep unease, like something was quietly waiting. Earlier that day, I'd felt a sharp pressure on my arm, a prickling touch with the memory of nails, even though I was alone against the wall. Since then, every corner of my house seems to hum with presence, and shapes flicker at the edge of my vision, and sometimes they stretch tall, sometimes they curl low. Feeling's always the same, like being watched through a keyhole. And I don't drink and I don't use drugs, but I haven't slept in days at this point. My thoughts, they feel frayed, like a rope about to snap. Half of me's wondering, is this just exhaustion or stress and my mind turning shadows into monsters? The other half, the part raised on quiet church hymns and whispered prayers, suspects something stranger might be at play. I've considered speaking to my pastor, and I've also kind of bookmarked the number of a psychiatrist whose kindness that I think I trust. I don't know which door I'll really be knocking on first, because all I know is that house is never empty anymore, even when no one is home. And for anybody who's suffering with BPD, I will tell you that it's hard for both parties involved, the person trying to help and the person who has it. It's like living hell for everyone. So my love goes out for everybody on every side of it. Anywhere and everywhere. At any time. Whispers on the third floor. I've always been tuned into the strange and unseen. Cameras in the house catch shimmering orbs, and once or twice the sharp outline of something that shouldn't be there. I've felt presences before, but last night was different. It started in the kitchen, and out of nowhere a sudden heat bloomed, and it just blew like below my hip. It was like somebody smacked me with 3 fingers. I actually checked to see if I'd cut myself or something, and there's nothing, no mark, and no reason. Half joking and half nervous, I said out loud, "If anyone's here, show me." Instantly, a chill swept over me, exactly like the cold whisper of air-conditioned car seats. But this was inside and only behind me, head to toe. I left and came back a minute later. The same icy caress returned, faint but unmistakable. No windows open, no vents running, just cold. And that was only the beginning. Upstairs on the 3rd floor, that's where my little boy slept. I kept a camera on him so I could smoke outside without worrying, and around 8 my phone reconnected to Wi-Fi and I checked the feed. My heart skipped. His small toddler bed, where he almost never sleeps, it had a laundry bag perched on top of it, and as I watched, the bag rolled off the bed, deliberate and slow, like somebody had nudged it. Stranger still, my son, who usually sleeps until at least 10, was suddenly awake. He was standing on his tiny mattress facing the wall, fingertips reaching high like he was greeting something invisible. He hadn't done that in months. So I hurried up and I coaxed him back into my bed, and because the motion alerts were going wild, I turned the camera sensors off. We settled in. Then he began waving. Not at me, but at something else, and I whispered again, "Are there any spirits here?" The bed shook. Not a soft tremor or real heavy jolt like somebody climbed on, and for a frozen heartbeat I couldn't even breathe. Then a weight pressed into my thigh hard. I thought maybe someone downstairs had dropped something heavy, but no pressure. It was too specific and too close. Even now as I write this, the same spot tingles like a warning. I entered the night in tears, stumbling downstairs and nearly hyperventilating. I know that I invited it with my words, but I didn't know, or not really, what might answer. And now I can't shake the feeling that something answered back. Midnight Visitor. It began as a strangely cozy dream. Family Thanksgiving that felt warm and loud, laughter, plates clinking, old friends dropping by, and everybody catching up in that hazy dream sort of way. But then the scene darkened. My parents stood in a shadowed corner, whispering urgently. I stepped closer, and without a word, my father handed me a heavy wooden bat. "Go help her," my mother breathed. On the floor, there lay a little girl that I didn't know, writhing and screaming. I pulled her back, heart hammering, and that's when it appeared, a small, shadowy creature. It was no bigger than a cat, but fast and vicious. It leapt at me, snapping sharp teeth and clawing at my arms. I swung the bat wildly, missing half the time, panic rising in me. And all the while, in my head, the Lord's Prayer kept looping. It was unbidden and desperate. I'm no longer a believer, but terror has a way of digging up old prayers. Then, shift. Suddenly, I'm in my real bedroom, in the same position I'd fallen asleep in. And for a breath, I thought I'd woken up. My cat lay curled beside me, blinking calmly. Shaking, I reached for my phone to text my friend, the one I sometimes investigate strange things with. But before I could even type, something unseen scuttled up the bed, fast, heavy, and invisible. I froze as claws, or something like claws, scratched across the blanket, and I screamed. But the sound stuck in my throat. The thing pounced, biting and dragging at my arms and shoulders, and I tried to dial my friend. I was shouting for help, and my body just refused. Every muscle locked, and my vision dimmed at the edges. And then, like a snapped cord, I just woke up, like really woke, I think. And for a few awful moments, I still couldn't move, and the phantom weight was pressing me down, and every heartbeat felt like pushing through wet cement. Finally, though, with a monumental effort, I grabbed my phone and I stayed awake until the room felt solid again. And the next morning, I cleansed the room with sage and salt. And later I told my friend everything. They said it might be stress, or maybe the old scars of religious fears. Maybe just sleep paralysis, or maybe something else. Still not sure which answer frightens me more. The bowl that blinked back. Back in 2020, something happened that I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it was a dream. I never told a soul until this week. It's when a friend casually shared a spooky memory of theirs. And that conversation cracked open the vault, and here I am typing this out because my late-night search for similar experiences turned up absolutely nothing. No stories, no folklore, no Reddit threads. Thank God. Just me and this memory. It started on a rainy afternoon. I'm sitting cross-legged on the dining room floor, absently watching my reflection in a large, clear glass salad bowl balanced on a cardboard box. The light from the small lamp behind me made my reflection look like a dark, soft-edged silhouette in a curved surface. and something about it held me, like I was staring at a living photograph. I shifted slightly, testing the shadow, and my mirrored figure followed, of course, until it didn't. And at first, I just tried to blame the weather. Maybe the tree outside was swaying, causing a trick of the light, so got up, checked the window. No breeze, no movement, and the street beyond was still as a painting. So I sat back down, and this time determined to stay perfectly motionless. And then, unmistakably, my shadow in the bowl twitched. Not a flicker of light, an actual deliberate motion, a tilt of the head, a slow raise of both arms. I froze, breath shallow, my real arm stayed rooted to my sides. But the figure in the bowl finished its own slow, graceful stretch and tilted forward as if peering at me. The room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator, and I waited and counted heartbeats. My shadow lowered its arms and tilted its head the other way, almost curiously. The spell broke when a neighbor's car door slammed outside. I jolted as my reflection snapped back to perfect mimicry, as if nothing had ever happened. I've replayed that minute thousands of times. Just been looking for a logical explanation, like sleep deprivation or optical illusions or some weird refraction thing. But nothing fits the absolute stillness of the room and the deliberate way my shadow moved. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I was wide awake sitting upright, and, well, for years I kept the secret because who'd believe it? But here I am wondering if someone somewhere has this kind of moment when their own reflection stopped being theirs, and when it decided to move first, and if the voice that comes after is AI or is me pitched up. I don't know either. The visitor at 4 a.m. It was around 4, and that's when I finally surrendered to the couch, half asleep and ready to drift away. And just as my eyes closed, a sudden cold draft brushed across my face. My first thought was immediate and uneasy. It was like something's here. And I've always been strangely sensitive to these things. Paranormal currents that most people would never notice. I stayed perfectly still. I was hoping it would pass. And then I felt a presence standing, like right next to me. It was silent, but it was heavy, like an invisible figure was breathing in my space. Fear locked me in place, and I kept my eyes shut because whatever this was, I was not ready to see it. And then it happened. Without warning, my body and my being separated. I wasn't floating through space. It was stranger than that. My physical self stayed in the couch, but I was beside it, like layered apart. A deafening sound filled my head, a mix of shattering glass and magnetic waves, buzzing like an electrical storm inside both my ears. Something or someone, took my right hand, and I didn't move it, but it felt like it was rising, almost as if it were weightless. Panic flared, obviously, and I forced the arm back down, even though physically it never seemed to leave the couch. And then the voice came, and it was inside my head and low and mechanical, yet not fully robotic. "Where is a church?" it asked. At first, I barely understood what it was saying, and then the question repeated deeper and colder. "Where is a church?" The sound was eerily like those ghost hunting recordings where spirits speak through static. And almost without thinking, I raised my arm again and pointed toward a church I know several streets away. "Thanks," the voice said. Simple and final. Instantly, the buzzing stopped and the presence was gone. And just like that, I snapped back into my body. And for a long minute, I lay there, stunned with my heart hammering, and I crossed myself, which is odd for somebody who doesn't really believe before daring to open my eyes. This wasn't a dream. I know the soft edges of sleep. This was nothing like that. Lately, strange things have been happening more often. Shadowed figures in corners and flickers at the edge of the vision, and well, I've been dabbling in tarot these past months. Sometimes I wonder if it's all connected. Most nights I tell myself it's just imagination, but not this time. Later on, I told my brother, and he admitted he'd been feeling a strange tingling in his own body around the same hour. Just can't shake that thought that something passed through my living room that night, something that needed directions. And now it knows the way, at least. Echoes of a Silent Link. I don't usually spill things like this, but I just woke up shaking and, well, I just need to get this out. Since I was a kid, I carried what feels like a strange private superpower. Whenever I think about someone, like really think about them, it's like a quiet signal goes out. Sooner or later they call, text, or drop a random "you just popped into my head" message. It's happened too many times for me to shrug off. Oh my God, my foot is asleep. When I first suspected it was real, I tried to break it and I picked somebody who by all logic was gone from my life. My childhood friend, Omar. We lost touch back in grade school. More than 10 years, and I didn't know his number, where he lived. There's nothing, just his name and the blur of an old photo in my mind, and pins and needles in my foot. I sat there one night, focused on him for a few minutes, and then went to bed. But by the next evening, my phone buzzed. Facebook notification. Guess who messaged? Omar. Omar out of nowhere. He wrote that he'd been randomly thinking of me and tracked me down. Turns out he's been living in Lisbon and has a wife and 2 kids. And a dozen other details that barely matter here, except that he found me. It kept happening. Different people, different ways, and if I wanted to get closer to somebody, say a girl I just met, I'd let my thoughts circle around her like a quiet orbit, and days later she'd reach out. And when we'd talk, she'd confess something like, "I couldn't stop thinking about you. Had to see you again to figure out why." Then came tonight, about half an hour ago. I was dreaming of an old college friend, one I haven't spoken to in forever, and in the dream he was right there with his lips moving but words muffled. I started awake and, startled awake to the sound of my phone because it was ringing, not buzzing this time. His name was lighting up my screen. I didn't pick up, I just couldn't. I just stared and felt the room tilt. I'm not bragging, I'm honestly rattled, and I don't know if this is some strange pattern of coincidences or if there's something real, like something invisible, threading my thoughts to theirs. And right now, I'm not sure which idea scares me more. The Midnight Bell, and the Vanishing Kisses. This is a story passed down from my dad. So, a few edges you could say might be fuzzy, because it's 30-something years of that, and it can kind of do a thing to a memory. But here it goes anyway. It all began right after I came home from a hospital. A coworker of Dad's had gifted him a large factory-sealed glass jar of Hershey's Kisses. They were silver and purple foils, and they were glinting like treasure to me at the time. Knowing his own sweet tooth, Dad stashed the jar at the very top shelf of his bookcase. A spot so high that even Mom would have needed a step stool to reach it, and this will matter later, so trust me. Within days of my arrival, strange nights happen. Like at random hours, never the same twice, a soft, delicate bell would ring from somewhere in the room where I slept. And if I spent the night in my parents' room, the bell sounded there, and if I stayed with Grandma or my aunt, the bell migrated too. Everyone eventually heard it, and at first they blamed exhaustion or postpartum nerves. Maybe a draft shaking something loose. But the bell kept ringing. Weeks later, Dad, ever the neat freak, was rearranging his shelves when he seemed to freeze. The candy jar wasn't as full as before. Not a single foil wrapper was laying around, and the factory seal seemed to still be intact. The jar itself looked untouched and perfectly aligned on the shelf, and the bell and the disappearing chocolates kept pace. When we moved upstairs to a sunnier apartment, the nightly chime followed as though it had packed its own ghostly suitcase. The chocolates kept dwindling, and then as abruptly as it began, it ended. No one can quite agree when, but Mom insists it stopped when I was about 6 months old. Dad swears it coincided with the passing of a distant relative, a reclusive great-uncle with a fondness for bells and sweets, whose story deserves a whole other telling. They've asked friends and family for decades, but no one has heard of anything like it. A tiny midnight bell that follows a newborn while a sealed jar of chocolate quietly empties itself. To this day, we wonder, was it a family spirit checking in, or a trick of the memory, or something stranger that visits the very young? Or somebody like me when I was a kid that can take off the factory seal, eat the candy, and put the factory seal back on. Guilty of that. The Intercom House. I want to tell you about something that still lingers in my mind. Not because it was terrifying, but because it felt strangely personal. This happened years ago, in the late 70s, the house that my brother and I was renting for a while. The place came with an old intercom system, and there was a main panel in the kitchen, little speakers in every room. By the time we moved in, it was mostly broken, but every now and then, faint sounds and static and distant whispers like odd clickings they'd slip through. At first, it was small oddities, slow, deliberate footsteps in the upstairs hallway. The wooden floors were so creaky that you could tell the difference between a house settling groan and a real step. Sometimes a cupboard door in the kitchen would just give a sudden metallic rattle, and every so often we'd catch what sounded like faint voices. Never through the speakers, but somewhere inside the house itself. Things shifted after our parents left town unexpectedly for a long legal mess. That left my brother and me to keep the house running on our own. And that's when the voice came. One morning, while we're getting ready, my brother's brushing his teeth upstairs, me making coffee downstairs. I heard a man's voice, and it was calm and clear, and it called out, "Hey, Rowan." That's my brother's name. A second later, Rowan thundered down the stairs, swearing he'd just heard me call him. But I hadn't said a thing, which is kind of strange. And after that, quiet greetings would sometimes drift from the corner of a room like a soft hello. Almost conversational, but not quite. Never felt threatening, more like somebody politely checking in. We ended up giving him a name, Gavin. Somehow it seemed to fit. Gaz never slammed doors or sent chills down our spines, but he did linger. A presence, and almost like he wanted us to know that we weren't alone in a rough patch. But we did eventually move out, and I've lived in plenty of places since, but nothing has ever been that same quiet, watchful sort of atmosphere. So thanks for letting me share it, and I don't want to talk about it that much, but if you've ever met a spirit that felt more curious than cruel, I'd love to hear your story too. The Midnight Veil. I live in Eastern Europe along a lazy river famous for party rafts and wooden decks that you can rent for 20 or 30 people to float, drink, and laugh until sunrise. And by chance, my house is just a short walk from that stretch of water. First brush. One warm night, we gathered to toast a friend's soon-to-arrive baby. Everyone was happily drunk except me and a girl who couldn't drink because of her meds. When the snacks and beer began to run out, the two of us volunteered to drive the 5 miles to a late-night shop. The ride back was pretty quiet, except for her funny story about her cat's obsession with laundry. Then something cut the night in half. A dark, human-shaped blur leapt across the road, 2 faint amber points like eyes glimmering for an instant. "Did you see that?" I blurted. She didn't even pause her story. "I did," she admitted after about a breath or two. I'm not pretending nothing happened because I'd rather not scream right now. Wasn't it a trick of headlights or imagination? The figure actually moved, and possibly fast. A living shadow that vaulted the road and vanished toward the river. Second glimpse. Months passed and the memory softened, until my mother needed late-night company for her doctor-prescribed walk. The moonlight was unusually sharp and silvering the farmland paths behind our houses. Pawsey the dog padded behind us. Little on the nose. Out of there stands a lone peach tree, oddly alive in a sea of tilled soil. And from behind it, something darted, no footsteps, no rustle, just a swift slide, as if a computer cursor had been dragged across a black screen. Pawsey froze, and my mother gasped. We're turning back, and she said it was with sudden steel, and we don't do midnight walks anymore. Final vigil. Curiosity, of course, is stubborn. One clear night I returned, this time alone except for Pawsey. The stars burned like cold fire, and the world was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. We waited in perfect stillness for 15 long minutes. Just as my thoughts began to wander, it came. The shadows zigzagged between the peach tree and distant bush and the fence line. And now I could tell it was human height, and it was brown-tinged in the moonlight, and it was gliding without legs. Faint eye spots gleamed where a head should be. It never approached, never threatened. It was like if it had wanted harm, well, I would have been helpless. But instead, it simply vanished into darker fields, as if retreating to its hidden home. And my dog has a lot of those prescriptions for walks. Sometimes I think they're forged. The house that won't stay quiet. I guess you could call this an encounter, but to me it feels more like a long confession. One that's been brewing for years. Our family home has always been strange. 3 floors, we live in the middle one. Bottom floor has been empty since I was little. And the top floor went silent after 2018. From my earliest memories, doors opened or closed with slow, deliberate movements. Nothing like the slam or draft. Just a steady, purposeful motion that no breeze could explain. I heard odd creaks and soft, misplaced sounds. But I only truly began noticing them around 2014 or 15. And being born in 2006, I'd been too young to care until then. The first real fright. The first time the house really scared me was around 2016. My great-grandfather had lived on the ground floor until he died in 2012. I only met him once, but I can't seem to forget it for the life of me. Peeked through a window, and I found him staring back at me with an expression I can only describe as pure hatred. My parents and he had legal disputes, and maybe that explains it, but the gaze seemed to burn into me. Years later, after his death, we renovated the ground floor. We moved all of me and my brother's Lego sets down there, and I loved building late into the evening, but that particular night something felt off. The hallway door was open and the living room doorless loomed beyond. I kept glancing over my shoulder. At one point, I thought I caught a flicker of movement and then a soft sound behind me. When I turned, I saw this dark figure running through the hallway. It was quick and human-shaped and impossible. It was already nighttime, but no streetlight shined into that space. I was sitting still. Couldn't have been my own shadow, in other words. To this day, I can't reason it away. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I refused to go downstairs after 6 p.m. The hammering above. A mini story from the same guy. For a while, things quieted, if you could call slow-moving doors and unexplained knocks quiet. Then 2018 came, and my great-uncle who lived upstairs passed away. He'd been difficult, a late-night tinkerer who hammered and fixed his battered bicycle at odd hours. He lost his old motorbike long before he died. Not long after his funeral, I lay in bed one night and I heard it like hammering and the shuffle of somebody working above me. Out of pure habit, I thought, great, he's at it again. Then I remembered he was dead. And the realization hit so hard I almost screamed. It wasn't a one-off, the sound kept visiting. It was faint but undeniable. For nearly 2 years before fading for good, that is. The present unease. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe even needing therapy. I'm an atheist, a science-first kind of person. I want a logical answer, but nothing seems to fit. And now it's 2025, and 2 things push me to write this. First, I need to get it out, and talking to my mom is useless, and after every death she's marched around with incense sticks convinced the house is haunted. Secondly, the feeling is back. This time on her own second floor, and the air here has grown heavy again. That same prickling dread I felt the night I saw the hallway shadow has returned, and it's hard to describe how wrong it feels to be uneasy in your own home. Maybe nothing will happen, but maybe something will. And for now, I keep living here and listening and waiting and wondering if the house will ever stay quiet. Fire in the closets. I grew up in a house that was split right down the middle. My mom was a full-on believer in everything supernatural and spiritual, while my dad leaned halfway into atheism and dry jokes, and let's just say it made for some, colorful dinner conversations. From 2012 to 17, I was basically raised by the internet. Debate groups full of fiery atheists and equally fiery believers, they were sort of my playground. I'd watch endless videos of paranormal evidence, and every comment section would scream fake or photoshopped, and I shrugged and I moved on. And then 2020 arrived. A neighbor friend, we're going to call him Kareem, started acting strangely. We used to share memes and late-night snacks and half-baked business ideas, but suddenly he was distant. For a whole week he brushed me off with excuses like we had a fire at home, and that's a pretty big excuse. I assumed it to be a stove mishap or bad wiring, and I'm not the kind of guy who leaps into rescue mode anyway, so I just left it alone. But a few days later, he mentioned another quote-unquote loss, and something in his voice made me press harder. Finally, he blurted out, "There's black magic on my house." I kind of laughed because I'd heard the phrase 100 times online, but here, when somebody actually knew, well, that was strange. He swore that there were no gas leaks and no faulty wiring. He said djinns were behind it. I told him, okay, call me next time something happens and I'll bring my eyes and my phone. Don't think this is in America. Moving on, but 2 nights later my phone buzzed. I got there and look, I'm still not sure what I walked into. Every closet door was scarred with this deep, smoky, burn mark looking thing, like the wood had caught fire from inside of it. Clothes were shredded and hanging from the ceiling fan, stuffed into the toilet, even wedged between wall cracks. The house had looked as if somebody had thrown a silent war party while we were out. I filmed everything on Snapchat. Excuse me, my voice broke. Snapchat. I still have the clips. No demons posed for the camera that night, but at least what I saw, it didn't seem to add up, and I tried to stay skeptical, and maybe Kareem trashed the place himself. Perhaps, but why? It was a rented house, and insurance wouldn't cover supernatural vandalism. Bad insurance company. And those burns, they're clean, and they were black rings that looked as if heat had bloomed from the core of the wood, and it didn't match any fire I'd ever seen. Kareem's family, which was 7 or 18 people, well, they moved out soon after. And an imam advised them to relocate, saying the house had been, quote-unquote, and italicized, claimed. They found a new place, and for a moment of relief, they cooked a big welcome meal. Then Kareem's sister ran upstairs to grab something and found the entire meal, which are pots and plates and everything. It was all dumped neatly across a bed that she left empty minutes earlier. That was the last. And today I stand somewhere between my mom's faith and my dad's skepticism, but I tend to lean far closer to her side than I ever imagined. Maybe the djinn didn't show themselves because they knew I'd have my camera ready. Maybe they wait until no one's looking. Whatever the reason, I can't laugh it off anymore. Science explains a lot, but that night in Kareem's house, well, science hasn't caught up yet. The knocks between worlds. For nearly 3 months, I've been trapped in a strange war between sleep and waking. At first, it was occasional sleep paralysis, but the past 2 months have been a labyrinth of dreams within dreams, sometimes 3 layers deep, till I can barely tell where night ends and morning begins. The first descent. It began one ordinary night as I drifted off, and somewhere between thought and darkness, I heard deliberate footsteps in my room. I brushed it off as imagination, but the dream that followed was too sharp to ignore. I was back to my room, and, well, except half of it had kind of melted into a dense black fog. A heavy, electric dread pressed on my chest, and I tried to whisper a prayer, but my voice tangled and blurred, and each word was dissolving. Then I was jerked awake, or so I thought. My body was stone. None of this sounds like what it is, and it's a tall, shifting shadow actually looming beside the bed, and it was silent as I held my breath. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, and time became a stretched-out eternity until I finally broke free with my heart hammering while this whole thing was happening. The next time is the voice at the window. Weeks later, I made the mistake of sleeping with my window cracked open, and the night air felt pretty alive, like it was watching. I told myself it was nothing, and I slipped under only to jolt awake to a deep thud. Paralysis pinned me again, and this time moonlight spilled across the floor like a pale stage light. And a low, unfamiliar man's voice floated in from the darkness. "Why are you just lying there? I can see you." and panic was clawing at me. I willed my arms to move and my throat to shout, and there was nothing. A silhouette leaned into the window frame. The second I wrestled free, relief barely formed before I collapsed back into sleep and snapped into my paralysis again. The figure now stood inches from my face. My skin burned as if near an invisible fire, and over I repeated in my mind, I reject this presence until the pressure finally cracked. I shot awake for real this time. The little girl. One night, the darkness changed its rules. Instead of shapeless shadows, I dreamt somebody whispered that a spirit had latched onto me. And when I stirred, paralysis took hold. And this time, a small girl in a faded gray dress rested a cold hand on my arm. Their movements were agonizingly slow. She leaned closer, and I tore free and stumbled out of bed. And when I glanced back, she was crouched on the window ledge like a silent acrobat. Their eyes were locked on mine, and I fled downstairs, and I found my family gathered in a strange sort of stillness. My brother cradled a baby whose stare felt ancient. Sorry. On the grill sizzled something, but not food, but uprooted plants and scraps of metal. My mother beckoned me to the car, and when I peered inside, blackness swallowed everything, and I woke again paralyzed. A shadow was peering from the closet. The proof that I didn't want. So shaking, I turned on the light and I grabbed my phone. I left a voice recording app running. 2 clean, separate knocks played back, both captured from the direction of the window. No one else in the house had stirred and the dogs hadn't barked. And now every night feels like a negotiation with something unseen. Maybe it's only my mind, but maybe not. And when darkness falls and the walls settle, I can still hear soft and patient the knocks between worlds. The woman at the window. Ever since I can remember, odd things have followed me like a quiet shadow. My family came from an old country farm where superstition was a second language. Ghost stories weren't just stories, they were all warnings. And one summer, my cousin was almost pulled into something we couldn't see. She sat by the window, chattering with a quote-unquote girl outside that no one else could see. My uncle rushed in, yanked her back, and hid her beneath a quilt. Later that night, I glimpsed that same pale figure at my own window. Long black hair seemed to brush against the glass. I buried my face in my mother's chest, too terrified to even scream. The strange visits, they never really stopped. Friends seem to hate staying over because doors creak when they shouldn't, and lights flicker and the air feels heavy as if it's waiting. But my dreams, they're the worst part. There's even the same woman. Dark hair seems to hang like a curtain and eyes that are basically swallowing the light. And sometimes she whispers in a language I don't understand. Sometimes she presses her hands to my throat until I jolt awake gasping, but when I quote-unquote wake, I'm still in the exact spot where she's there, as though I was only blinking. Once I felt a palm on the back of my head, forcing my face into the pillow. And the only thing that saved me was the absurd thought that this is such a dumb way to die. And for a while, things calmed down after I rearranged my room. I pulled the bed away from the window and the door, but lately, the dreams had turned ritualistic and disturbingly intimate. Once, she slithered across the floor while I was bound, and her cold fingers were tracing my neck and her breath like winter air. At another time, she cornered me in a dream bookstore, and but her mouth was opening wider than in any human I've seen. And it was revealing this endless tongue. I wake up weak and slouched and my shoulders heavy as if she's still riding them. And my best friend half-jokingly suggested that maybe a curse is at work here. Something old and tangled in my family's past. My father's wild youth just kind of whispered rumors of witches, which doesn't seem to help me. And I don't know what scares me more, the thought that she isn't real and it's all in my mind, or the possibility that she is, and she's not finished with me. The Night of Two Shadows. It was one of those nights that never really leave you. I was 18 or 19, and now I'm 34, and both of my great-grandparents have already passed away. I'd gone to stay at my best friend Clara's house for the weekend. That night I dreamed I was back in my great-grandparents' old farmhouse. It's long since been sold. The dream, it seemed to feel razor sharp, like every creak of the floorboard had been waiting for me, and I turned toward the oak kitchen table, and, well, there he was. My great-grandfather, hunched slightly as if caught mid-story. My chest clenched, and I thought, don't blink. Instinct still won, and when my eyes opened again, he was gone. And sitting in his place was my mother, smiling softly. "What's wrong, Pebble?" Her name for me when I was small, which implies you can float. I woke with a start, and I decided I needed the bathroom, and Clara's room was in the attic then, by the way. And as I leaned out of bed, she suddenly shot upright, and something she'd never done in all these years I'd known her. She grabbed my wrist and murmured, "Don't go." "Why?" I whispered. A sleepy frown. "I don't know." And she sank back into her pillow. I stepped into the dim hallway, and at the top of the stairs I froze, because below stood a massive black hound with burning amber eyes and teeth so white they seemed to glow. Yet oddly, no fear rose in me. I just descended calmly. By the time I reached the bottom, the creature dissolved like mist, and there sat only Casey, Clara's sweet little collie, tail thumping against the floor, and I smiled, greeting her, and went to the bathroom. Later, drifting toward sleep again, I heard Clara's half-brother yelling at Casey. The dog liked to nap right in the hallway, and tripping anybody passing by the way, so I thought nothing of it, and I just closed my eyes. Morning shattered quiet. Excuse me. Clara's sobs, they pulled me awake, and Casey had suffered violent convulsions in the night and choked on her food. She was gone before sunrise. Still stunned, I left for my routine blood test. Back then, I was on weekly injections that required constant monitoring, and at the clinic, as soon as the nurse slid the needle in, a sudden weakness swept through me. My vision was swimming, and I'd never fainted before. They pressed a cold back to my neck and handed me orange juice. And then the part that still pins me is when I turned my head, I saw my grandfather, the son of the great-grandfather from my dream, standing in the doorway, calm and almost expectantly. "You okay?" he asked, and I kind of managed to yes back at him. But inside, I wasn't sure. 2 visits from the other side in a single night, one fading with a blink and the other arriving just in time, left me wondering where dreams end and something deeper begins. Whisper at the Window. A couple of months ago, I was live streaming a late-night spooky video watch party with my chat. My setup sits right next to a big old window that I usually leave uncovered during the day, so I can spy on my neighbor's golden retriever doing his evening laps. Alrighty then. But that night, the sky was moonless and heavy. I had my gaming headset clamped over my ears when a sharp thud exploded right next to me. I ripped the headphones off and called out, "Hello, anyone there?" There was nothing, just the low hum of my PC fans. I told my chat to hang on while I did a full lap around the house. Not a single thing out of place, no fallen books, no mischievous cat. And feeling uneasy but a little silly, I returned to my desk and, well, as I approached, my eyes caught something that didn't belong. At the top edge of the glass was a single smeared handprint. 4 unnervingly long fingers reached downward as if frozen mid-climb. My heart stuttered and the stream was still running. Chat was scrolling with question marks and what happened? I sat back down, trying to laugh it off like, okay, weird, but I'm fine, but let's keep watching. I hit play and I pulled the headset on again. That's when the sound changed. There was 3 taps and then they were soft and fleshy taps and they were deliberate. It was right against the glass, inches from my head. Not nails, but skin. I really couldn't make myself look. My voice trembled as I told the chat that I basically had to end early. And as I said goodbye, another violent bang cracked through the room. I killed the stream, grabbed my phone, and bolted upstairs to my husband. We sat in bed while he wrapped an arm around me and said it was probably just the wind, a tree branch, or something else ordinary. When we heard it, a drawn-out, almost human howl outside our second-story window. We turned off the air conditioner to listen. The sound lingered, and there's like this sort of wailing and echoing, and then slowly it drifted farther into the dark, until silence swallowed the house again. To this day, I keep that window locked tight, and the blinds closed. The Masked Whisper of Helvetia. Last weekend, my family and I took a small detour into Helvetia, which could be pronounced Helvetia, I don't really know. It's a quiet, timeless village tucked into the West Virginia hills. Lunch was at the town's famous all-in-one diner, part post office, part general store, part Fastnacht Mask Museum. It felt like stepping into a living postcard, except the air inside carried something heavier than nostalgia. The service moved at a glacial pace, so my son and I wandered toward the back of the diner. The screen door let in a soft autumn breeze, creaking faintly as it shifted. He peppered me with questions about the strange masks and the old bottles lining the shelves. Then, from my right, came the soft shuffle of approaching footsteps. Assuming somebody wanted a closer look at the displays, I instinctively just kind of stepped aside, turning with a polite smile. No one, just a thin slice of light through the doorway and the smell of wood and coffee. The space beside me was utterly empty, as if the sound itself had dissolved into the air. Normally, I'm the skeptical type, and ghost stories amuse me, but I've always filed them under interesting folklore. I once toured the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, camera in hand, waiting for the cliched cold spots and phantom whispers, but there was never anything. Apart from a moment in a blacked-out ward where I swear something unseen wanted me gone, but that's another story. My wife, on the other hand, lives on the other end of the spectrum. She senses things. And this time, before I even shared my little encounter, she leaned across the sticky diner table and said the place felt heavy on her chest, the way it does when we watch a truly chilling film. Adding to the oddness, our friend's daughter kept tugging at her father's sleeve, pleading to wait outside because, as she put it, the masks are staring. Later that evening, curiosity won. My wife pulled out her phone and fell into a Helvetia rabbit hole. Turns out, stories of ghostly figures and sudden footsteps at that very diner are local legend. There's threads on Reddit that read like echoes of what we'd experienced. Specters glimpsed in the corner of an eye, a presence felt but never seen. Skeptic that I am, I still don't have an airtight explanation. Maybe old floorboards and imagination, maybe something older. All I know is that Helvetia holds its history close. So close you might feel it breathing beside you, even when no one is there. The Whispering House. It was January 22nd, 2003. I just moved into my late grandmother's house, a quiet gray stone place with long, shadowed hallways, and a smell of old wood. 3 days had passed since her funeral, and according to her will, the house now belonged to me. I brought my 2 dogs with me for company, and that's when things began to feel off. The dogs would stand at the end of the hallway with their ears perked, staring into the darkness as if somebody were there. And one rainy afternoon, while I was alone downstairs, I suddenly heard the faint sound of 2 people talking in the living room. The voices weren't discussing anything real, just strings of random whispered words, and I froze and I called my dad, who apparently came over and stayed the night, but the whispers never came back that evening. 3 years later, life had changed. I was a parent now. My little boy, only 2 years old, never liked the house. He slept on the top floor, but often woke up crying. And one winter night, I heard him sobbing and hurried upstairs. His crib stood empty, and then I remembered he was with my girlfriend for the night, and my skin went cold. I turned to leave, trying to rationalize it, and it was like maybe exhaustion. And that's when I felt a breath on my ear and heard soft whispering. And that was enough. I grabbed the dogs, ran to the car, and drove away without looking back. Stayed at my mother's for nearly a week before returning, and the house just felt wrong. It's as if it had been emptied of its soul. You know that hollow stillness when you come home from a long trip? It was kind of like that, but, well, way heavier. The next night, my girlfriend invited a few friends over, and she loved ghost stories, and I wasn't there at the time. 3 hours later, she texted me kind of frantic. Like the house was on fire. They'd lit candles in the bed for atmosphere, and somehow the blankets caught. And by the time firefighters arrived, everything was gone. Everything except one thing. An old painting my grandmother adored, showing a little boy crying. And it survived untouched, no scorched marks, not even a hint of smoke damage. Years passed, and I dug into the painting's history and discovered unsettling details. Every house it had ever hung in had burned down, and the painting would always survive. Now in 2025, my son's 21 and swears he remembers that house was, well, he's only 2, but he suggested that he remembered it vividly. He moved into an old Victorian rental and claims he hears whispering at night, but still don't know what haunted my grandmother's house. But we know this, the whispers didn't end when the house burned and they followed somewhere else. Maybe the painting, or maybe us, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I still feel that breath against my ear. The quiet war in the hallway. Before my stepmother passed away, I used to see 2 presences inside her house. A soft, glowing woman in white and a shifting black figure that never quite held a shape. The woman felt like a gentle sigh, a quiet comfort. The dark thing never touched me, but later I learned it hadn't been so gentle with her. And I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. but the word home was always temporary. My father's Air Force career meant constant moving, and basically moving base to base, year to year, and well, by the time I could spell my own name, we'd already traded snow for the heavy, humid nights of a Carolina summer at the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. After my parents divorced, I stayed with Dad, and within a year he remarried. My stepmother, Mary Ann, had a body that seemed too delicate for the world. A thin plastic tube disappeared beneath her collarbone, a permanent reminder that her strength was borrowed. That was when the house began to feel alive, and the first night I saw her, well, the lady in white, it was around 2 a.m. At the time, I'd crept downstairs for a drink, and I was kind of padding past the quiet hum of the fridge. I was halfway up the staircase, and a figure drifted from my room toward my sister's. A faint glow followed her like the last night before dawn. There were no words, no sounds, just a presence so calm it almost hushed the air itself. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because something told me that she wasn't there to harm me. The next morning, Dad brushed it off as a simple dream, and I almost believed him. Almost. Weeks later, she came again, gliding past my door as if she belonged to the house more than we did, and each visit left the hallway scented with something faintly floral and old. Sort of like pages of a forgotten book. Then we moved to Texas. For months, and there was silence. Until one night I woke to a pressure in the room, like the air itself had weight to it. And at the foot of my bed stood a shape. It was blacker than the dark around it, and it was tall. It had edges that were writhing like smoke, but never fading. No glow, no scent, only an oppressive stillness. It lingered until I blinked, then melted into nothing. From that night onward, the pattern changed, and sometimes a lady in white, sometimes the shadow, but never both. As Mary Ann's health declined, the black figure became bolder, and I'd catch it in the doorways. A silhouette that refused to leave, as if waiting for some sort of permission. And she died when I was 8, and with her, both apparitions seemed to vanish. Years later, my sister confessed that she'd seen them too. The pale guardian and the restless shadow. First in Carolina, then in Texas. And our father, when pressed, admitted that the black shape had haunted Mary Ann long before he had met her. He spoke quietly of unseen, blows. Of nights when he woke gasping with bruises no one could explain. The lady in white, he believed, wasn't there for us at all. She was there for Mary Ann. I sometimes wonder if that dark thing fed on her weakening body, growing stronger as she grew frailer. Maybe it wasn't sickness alone that claimed her. Maybe the shadow was patient. A predator in no rush, waiting until her quiet protector could no longer hold the line. And my sister, by the way, still lives in that Texas house. She says the halls have stayed silent ever since. Shadows Under Hilltop Drive. Back in the booming 1980s, Hilltop Drive wasn't just another subdivision sprouting up like mushrooms after rain. Under the neatly drawn plats and cheerful model homes, a darker story stirred. The builders, chasing profits, flattened an old cemetery to make room for dream houses. Bodies were supposed to be moved, but the job was pretty rushed and messy and incomplete. Hollywood eventually caught the scent. Grave Secrets, Legacy of Hilltop Drive hit the screen. It was based on the eerie truth that bones sometimes rest poorly. Fast forward to 2019, and my family stumbled on what felt like our dream house, tucked just one block inside the same neighborhood. And we already knew the local folklore, like whispers of sickness and strange sounds, financial ruin, and that haunted earlier residents, but we reasoned that living near the edge of the development, away from the infamous center, might keep us safe. Pretty classic rookie logic. A month after we unpacked boxes and reality crept in, we learned that the house, where remains were literally unearthed, was only half a mile away. Worse, the dense woods across from us still hid toppled headstones. A few Newport neighbors even filmed proof and posted it on the Newport Crosby ghost page. My heart sank watching those videos. Silent markers, sort of leaning in the shadows like the dead were still taking attendance. Then the story tightened its grip. When my kids started school, I befriended a longtime resident, and she remembered the man who once cataloged those graves, at least before relocating them. He'd passed on, of course, taking his secrets with him. But she added a chilling detail, because before we moved in, her own son had poked around her yard, searching for a long-lost headstone. She pointed to a spot near the lamppost, and I told her, half joking, that I could that it could stay buried. Time skipped again to now, and activity inside her house is strange knocks and cold drafts. It's only increased. Why? Because developers moved in across the street, and bulldozers cleared the woods in weeks, faster than permits could possibly appear. No sign of careful exhumations and no respectful reburials. 1 month the forest stood, the next bare ground stretched where graves once laid. Our slightly crooked but lovable home feels charged like the earth itself remembers. Maybe those restless spirits never left Hilltop Drive. They just maybe are waiting for somebody to finally listen. The Whispering Figurine. I was a freshman in college in the fall of 2019, still adjusting to dorm life and late-night cafeteria runs. My girlfriend at the time, which we're going to call her Lex, lived in the dorm suite right next to mine. Just a single brick wall separated our rooms, and her suite held 4 girls. Lex and her roommate, Lauren, on one side, and 2 others, Anna and Candace, on the other. Anna had just returned from a trip to Chile. It's with her family, and they were carrying stories, souvenirs, and, as it turned out, something else. One night, Anna unveiled what she called a gift for the room. A tall, carved wooden figurine of a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. It looked old and handcrafted with strange markings I couldn't place. Anna claimed it brought good energy, but warned in a serious tone, "Don't mock or touch it. Bad things follow disrespect." And I was 18, so naturally I brushed against it on purpose. I was joking as I knocked it lightly from the windowsill. Lex and Lauren gasped, but I laughed it off. A few nights passed, and Candace, the other bilingual roommate, they overheard Anna on the phone with her parents. And her Spanish was quick and sharp, but Candace caught enough to translate later. "They touch it, they'll pay." And that's when things started to feel different, because whenever I stayed over in Lex's room, I found my eyes drawn to the figurine. It was like a magnetic pull, and subtle but insistent. I told myself it was just in my head. Then small oddities began. One evening in the campus library, the lights flickered in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I chalked it up to closing time, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. A few mornings later, Lex texted me in a panic, "Come here now." When I arrived, I saw deep black scratches gouged into the white brick wall near the windowsill. They weren't random scuffs, they were claw-like marks, and nobody had heard a sound overnight. That evening, I came armed with holy water from the campus chapel. I placed a small Bible by the window. It was half joke, half insurance, and I stayed over. Around 3 a.m., I woke up, or at least I thought I did, and the room was unnervingly still. At the foot of the bed, something shifted. A translucent shape, tall and faceless like air shimmering over hot pavement, and it drifted forward. I tried to scream, but my voice locked in my throat, and Lex didn't stir. The figure lingered for a breathless few seconds, then simply dissolved. By morning, Lex and Lauren swore they hadn't woken once, and I told them everything. They stared, pale but unconvinced. Campus clergy came the next day. Priests sprinkled holy water, chanting prayers that echoed strangely in the small room, and Anna silently collected the figurine and took it elsewhere. After that, the scratching stopped. The heavy feeling lifted, and I never saw the figure again. Years later, even as I write this, that night stays sharp in my memory, and the stillness and the cold in my chest and the way the air bent around something I could barely comprehend. Whatever it wasn't just in my head. The Night Visitor. For years, a single shadow has stalked my sleep, and last night it leaned so close I could feel his breath. And it began back when I boarded at my grandmother's house in the province. The first time I woke to a tall, pitch-black figure bending over me. It was pressing on my chest. My heart was racing, and I phoned my mom before dawn, stammering through what felt like a nightmare too real to dismiss. Before that, my bad dreams were harmless. Strange images of a stone angel slowly turning its head. And only twice. But after the shadow came, the pattern changed. Each time I drifted into deep exhaustion, the same scene replayed with unnerving precision. And over months, I stopped asking if it would come and started wondering only when. I used to think nightmares were rare. I could count them in one hand, and I've lost track now. And for a long time, I never told anyone. When I finally confided my cousin and aunt one rainy evening, their startled faces told me it wasn't as ordinary as I'd convinced myself. And that very night, it escalated. Not 5 minutes after sleeping, the darkness thickened, and there he was, and he was closer, and he was louder. The room seemed to vibrate with his voice like a furious roar in a language I couldn't place. My chest was constricting, and I tried to sleep, but I was wiggling my toes to wake up from the paralysis, and nothing was breaking the spell. I forced my eyes open. My vision snapped to the ceiling, but my limbs stayed heavy as stone. Each time, my eyelids fluttered shut, and he was back, now only inches away, with his eyes burning with a red glint I'd never seen before. I begged God under my breath, and then faintly, my cousin's alarm chimed from the next room. That small sound ripped through the nightmare like light through glass. I shot awake gasping. As I told her everything, the overhead light flickered, once, twice, like a warning I still can't explain. And even now as I write this, I know that it isn't gone. He's only waiting for the next time exhaustion wins. Midnight Visitor. This happened about 2 months back. And even now it feels like a dream that keeps slipping through my fingers. I remember jerking awake in a pure panic. No groggy stress, just instant adrenaline. Something was watching me. If I had to describe it, the closest thing would be like, imagine the forest demon from Smiling Friends, only leaner and darker. Its skin wasn't really skin, but more like tree bark stretched over shadows. I'm not sure if I remember it clearly or if I'm remembering the memory of it. But it stood there, motionless, grinning like it knew exactly what it was going to do to me. So I scrambled for my phone to hit the flashlight. But of course, I fumbled like the idiot who dies first in a horror movie, and the phone clattered to the floor. My brain was pure static, and I half rolled, half fell out of bed, dragging my blanket with me. Eyes locked on the thing. My legs, they refused to cooperate, and I just knelt there on the floor, trembling and shouting at it to stop over and over. And then the door banged open. My dad rushed in, flipping the switch. The room flooded with yellow light. Empty. And just me, tangled in a blanket heap, gasping. He asked if I was okay, in words I barely heard because I couldn't stop staring at the corner where it had been. The part that still freaks me out is before I even screamed, my dad said he heard a noise. Not footsteps, something like a low wail or deep growl. He even tried to imitate it, and it wasn't quite an animal and wasn't quite human. I haven't seen it since, but strange things like this, they followed me all my life. Usually it's subtle, cold spots and whispers and occasional shadows where no shadows belong. But nothing like this. And unlike those stories where people are frozen with fear, I could move. Sometimes I wonder if I'd stayed calm if I'd just watched. Would something else have happened? The Hollowed Echo. I have a dear friend who whispers that she wants to end her life. She tells me she cries every night and that sleep flees from her like a frightened bird. And at first I thought she was simply crushed by sadness. But then she said something stranger. She wakes up screaming, sometimes on a train or in the middle of a busy street, and her voice is never quite her own. She began therapy weeks ago, so I asked her when her next appointment was, which she replied tomorrow. We kept texting and her words spilling out like dark water. Then she told me something that chilled me. There's a hollow inside her chest, a pain that isn't her pain. She cries over grief that isn't hers. I froze and I said, "Do you mean something spiritual or something dark?" I asked. She hesitated and said, "I don't know." And that's when everything I thought I understood cracked, because months of messages suddenly felt like riddles. I told her, almost pleading, "Don't share this part with the therapist. We need something deeper. We need God. And I'm terrified for her. She's fragile and frightened, and now I see that she may never have been talking about mere depression. What if she's being haunted, or worse, possessed by something unseen? She's fought the silent war for 4 years now with no one to confide in, fearing she'd be dismissed as being crazy. I know the world will call it illness, and doctors will evaluate and label, but I believe that she's not insane because something evil presses in on her, and I just can't let it win. I pray for her every night, but prayers feel small against this shadow. She needs help, but not the kind that writes prescriptions. We need somebody who knows the hidden battles, a true spiritual guide, maybe a gifted investigator of the unseen, before that darkness convinces her to end a life that isn't entirely hers anymore. So, if you read this, pray with me. The Bobby Pin Messenger. Just as the title promises, my family, being my mom, my dad, and my 19-year-old brother and me, a 23-year-old female, we seem to share our home with what we call the Bobby Pin Messenger. We've never called in a medium, never caught anything on camera, and we have zero quote-unquote proof that would convince a skeptic. But to us, she's as real as a creak in an old floorboard, almost like a playful, unseen grandmother keeping watch. Here's a small series of accounts. I call this one a house with a whisper. I grew up in a roomy Victorian on a bustling street built in 1863 and listed as a local landmark. We never labeled it haunted, but definitely had moods. Sometimes the attic light, a dial that he had to twist, would be glowing when we would run errands, and other times we'd watch a phantom drip bead on the ceiling. Oh, a phantom drip bead on the ceiling, without a single pipe leak in sight. Old town records confirmed a woman died there long ago, though the details kind of faded with time. The mystery of the bobby pins. Here's the strange part. Nobody in our house wears bobby pins, ever. Yet every so often one would appear, and usually on a dresser or on a staircase, tucked behind a sofa, and we'd just shift it. Not after parties, not after guests, always inside our private spaces. And over time we noticed a pattern. These pins only showed up before a big family change. Once, Dad found one on the tiled floor of his nearly all-male office bathroom, just days before a sudden layoff notice arrived. No coworkers claimed it. Another time we discovered a pin in the morning. It was a morning that we had won a surprise radio giveaway, an all-expenses trip to Vancouver. At the hotel pool, Dad scooped up towels for us, and we were the only swimmers. And that's when we returned to dry off, and there was a single bobby pin resting neatly on a folded sort of towel pile. It's like it had been waiting for us, following us everywhere. The pattern never stopped, and years later when my parents were house hunting, Dad spotted a long pin on the hardwood of the place that we now call home. And oddly enough, that tiny bit of metal felt like a green light to buy. College brought my own encounters. The first day I moved into the dorms, a pin sat squarely on my bare mattress, and after a tough year, I decided to withdraw, only to find one taped to my door on the last day of classes. Nobody knew this family quirk, and it sent chills through me. Yet I did eventually return. I changed my major and I graduated. And every single dorm I lived in gifted me at least one more bobby pin. Even on commencement day, one waited quietly near my cap and gown. A sign or just coincidence? Well, this week I walked to work after a promising job interview with my nerves going crazy. And there it was, a bobby pin on the sidewalk, gleaming like a quiet wink from the universe. Maybe it's just not coincidence, or maybe our spectral grandmother is still nudging us toward life's next chapter. But either way, when I see that tiny black curve of metal, I can't help but smile. The bobby pin messenger is still with us. The Little Room at Hawthorne Lane. When I was 5, my parents moved us into a 1920s semi-detached house on Hawthorne Lane, a quiet tree-lined street in a suburban Birmingham. My baby sister had just turned 1, and at first nothing about the house seemed remarkable, until I started making friends with people no one else could see. I named them, bracing myself for this, Ida and Udamamawi. Names far too peculiar for a child to invent. Udamanawi. I mostly played with them in the attic and the laundry room, in the two darkest corners of the house. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they'd vanished when I was about 7. Everyone decided it was just a phase, and I tried to believe that too. And by 9, the nights turned strange. I'd awake frozen. My eyes would be wide open. I'd be unable to move while something heavy seemed to press down on my chest. The old lamp and record player in the lounge began switching on and off when no one else was home. Shadows pooled in the corner of the room where the light never reached, and I learned only years later that a previous owner had ended his life in that very space. My bedroom at the back of the house, overlooking a long garden with a cherry tree and an old air raid shelter, was the worst. Objects I carefully placed each night, my hairbrush, the TV remote, they were somewhere else by the morning. The door, which dragged against the carpet, would inch shut on its own. I'd feel the duvet being slowly tugged away as I lay there, holding it tightly. The desk slid, stiff and hard to move, and would suddenly drop with a bang. One stormy night in my teens, everything erupted at once. First, a crash loud enough to wake the household. Then the loft hatch, heavy and awkward, flung itself open. And moments later, the smoke alarm shrieked, though there was no smoke. And at dawn, we learned my great-grandmother had passed away overnight, and I still wonder if she chose that frightening way to say goodbye. When I left for university at 18, Mom began sleeping in my old room. She'd spent years telling me I had an overactive imagination. But years later, she quietly admitted she never felt at ease there and could never sleep with the door shut. The final twist came in mid-2000s, the day before my parents sold the house. And as Mom tidied the front garden, an elderly woman paused and spoke. She remembered playing there in the 1920s. It's back when it was just a field and open countryside. Her childhood friend, one of the first children to live in her house, had eaten wild berries from those fields and died in her sleep. In the small back bedroom, which is, well, my bedroom. And even now, decades later, I sometimes drive past the house on Hawthorne Lane. The cherry tree still stands, and the attic window seems to watch the street. I can't help but feel that the little girl who never woke is still there, quietly keeping the room she once called her own, and probably should have gotten for the cherries on the cherry tree. The knock in the hallway. It began with a knock. One quiet Thursday night, my boyfriend's laughter. Why did I say laughter? My boyfriend's daughter, Lily, was upstairs in her room with the door closed. From the sliver of light beneath the door, she saw a shadow glide past, and then came a knock. Not a random tap, but his knock. The exact rhythm my boyfriend always uses. 3 quick, and then a pause. Only he wasn't upstairs. He and I both are on the couch downstairs talking about our weekend plans. So we tried to laugh it off, and maybe she imagined it, and maybe the house creaked just right. But then came the second time. Again, Lily was in her room while we sat downstairs. My boyfriend suddenly glimpsed someone, a dark figure with Lily's build, turning the corner toward the basement door. They were certain it was her. He called her name, and there was silence. Assuming she was teasing him, he followed, calling louder as he descended the steps. The basement lights were already on, and every corner checked, and there was no one. When he finally came back up, puzzled, Lily came walking out from her room upstairs where she had been the whole time. We tried to forget it until a few nights ago. It was past midnight, and I lay in bed with our 16-month-old daughter asleep beside me. My boyfriend had just stepped back into the room when he froze, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw what looked like a child, small and quick. They darted across the floor and slipped behind the dresser. But our baby was still curled beside me, breathing deeply and completely asleep. I've never seen anything myself. Still, there have been other strange flickers. Doors closing on their own and a whisper of footsteps on the stairs. Always when my boyfriend or Lily are alone. So we keep a Bible open to the Lord's Prayer in every bedroom now. Doesn't stop the house from settling at night, and it doesn't stop the knocking. The Blue Glass Intruder. When it was the summer of 2002, when I, a restless teen, spent a week with my family at a friend's coastal retreat in the Yallingup, Western Australia. I'm sure I screwed that up. Yallingup. The house was a sun-bleached fisherman's shack perched on old timber stilts, just a short stroll from a quiet beach. And inside it was all pretty much an open plan, with the kitchen, dining table, couch, TV corner sort of blending into one breezy space. A few years earlier, they'd added a long sleep-out room with enough single beds for a small army of cousins. The first night, though, I flat out refused to sleep in that thatched room. It wasn't directly connected to the main house, and something about the dark silence outside set off every alarm bell in my young brain. Instead, I claimed the living room couch, no more than a few paces from where my parents were sleeping. Just after midnight, the house was quiet, and I lay awake with my eyes stuck on the tiny square kitchen window. And that's when it happened. Out of the window pane itself, through the glass, slid a figure, a lean, human-shaped silhouette glowing in soft electric blue. It looked like somebody wearing a translucent morph suit of light, completely noiseless. My body locked with a fear so sharp it felt physical. I couldn't call out, I couldn't even twitch. The figure stepped from the kitchen counter, began to drift around the room. It tilted its head at the framed photos. It examined a pot on the stove. And then it paused at the bookshelf as though browsing. Nothing it touched moved. Not even the hot dog sitting in the old water on the stove. It was like watching curiosity itself in motion. Eventually it glided toward me. My heart was going a bit crazy, and I lowered my eyelids just enough to see through thin lashes, pretending to sleep. The figure crouched by the coffee table, ghostly hands sifting through a neat stack of board games, yet the boxes stayed perfectly still. Then, with a sudden swivel, it leaned over me until its faceless face hovered inches from mine, and the air around me felt charged and humming. I couldn't bear it. I snapped my eyes shut and forced out a strangled, drawn-out cry, screaming for my mom. The effect was instant. The figure shot upright and swept across the floor in a single liquid motion. The front door, which I knew was deadlocked, it swung inward with a sharp bang, and the security screen sprang outward at the very same moment. And then silence. Seconds later, my mom appeared, bleary and frowning, insisting the wind must have done it. Though I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes, and I spent the rest of the night wedged between my parents, sleep and a distant dream. Years later, I returned to that house and slept there without incident, and still the image of that glowing blue visitor had never left me. Maybe it was a curious spirit. Maybe it was something stranger. Some people say such paralysis means it was feeding on my energy. Maybe. All I know is it came through solid glass, and it was real enough to make every hair on my body stand on end. And yes, even those hairs. Seats that stay empty. I was born inside of a storm. My father wasn't just angry. He was a hurricane of addictions and cruelty. Our walls shook with shouting, and the silence afterwards was worse. He had a way of making words bruise, like, "You're nothing to me," and he'd spit, and "Everything you wear is because of me, don't forget it." And when I stumbled on a school exam, he punched my mother instead. At 12, I knelt on the cold floor with tears soaking my sleeves, begging him to stop, and I just threatened everything I could, and He chuckled with his eyes flat. "They'll call it family business or I'll pay them. What will you do, little girl?" My child mind believed him. Survival became my only language. Other wounds came from elsewhere. Strangers and quote-unquote family friends who crossed lines, leaving confusion and shame that rewired how I saw men and really trust in general. And when I was 19, he died. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. I became the adult overnight. I was feeding my mother's fragile moods. I was caring for my little brother and managing an aging grandmother whose daily rituals were iron laws. I basically couldn't afford to fall apart, and I had to work non-stop serving everyone around me. Appreciation never really arrived, and, well, I started working right out of high school. Never stopped. Even through the pandemic, while the world slowed down, I kept stacking jobs and added more studies. Rent and groceries and tuition, and every dollar had evaporated into necessity. Money never even felt like mine. In 2022, my grandmother passed away, and by May of 2023, I moved to New York City for a master's degree. A move that was as much escape as education. Between 2018 and 2023, I had one serious relationship, my first real love. I poured everything into it, and he drained it dry financially and took all of my money and all my trust, and when it ended, he passed my number around like a dare. Then harassment followed. A man even came to my door, and that kind of betrayal kind of hardens you until stone feels safer than flesh. Still, I kept going, and I've never seen a healthy marriage, never known a safe male figure, and I've been really earning that since I was 15. Now here I am, in New York. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't party. I work and I study, and no friends yet. Graduation's December 2025, and for the first time, the money I will make will stay mine. No debts, no loans. And yet something small cracked me today. On the bus after work, every seat with a man stayed filled. 5 women stood, an elderly couple kind of swaying with the turns. An older black woman clutched the rail. Not one man moved. And a few days ago, an elderly gentleman had offered me a seat. I had smiled all the way home. It made me wonder again. Why do so many men harm and laws stay weak? Why does empathy feel like a rare mineral, and why this life? And for me, if there's a God, if karma's real, what if all the women crushed by violence? Were we all guilty of something impossible? I don't want children, I don't dream of anything, and I won't risk recycling pain. I've had a handful of experiences, and, well, somebody who I'd been with later admitted to being asexual. I forget what that means. I'm 26 and finishing a master's soon and holding a good job, and I have brown hazel eyes. I'm 10 kilos over some chart, but finally breathing, and I don't eat meat. I don't numb myself with alcohol or smoke. So tell me, am I overreacting, or am I simply finally feeling the weight of life that I've carried like armor for decades?
Welcome to the world of wonder at Paranormal M, where we unravel tales that defy explanation. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to embark on a journey through our latest thought-provoking stories. Enjoy the intrigue. Can y'all help me figure out what something was in Parallel Forest, Oklahoma? So, I need some help figuring out what the hell something was. For context, I'm a 17-year-old girl. Don't know if it's important or not. And I live in Oklahoma. And my mom, grandma, and her dog, and I, decided to have a girl's day out, which included going to Parallel Forest for some hiking. It was about sunset-ish when we arrived, and we went hiking. A few minutes of hiking, I sort of noticed a figure within the tree line. It was like Dear God, or the Beast, if you ever played Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, or watched Over the Garden Wall. But it didn't have flesh nor skin, and it wasn't made of wood, just the antlers, bone, and the skull of a deer. I figured, don't bother it and it won't bother me. Don't be a nuisance to the forest. I eventually separated from my mom. I kept her within view and made sure that she wasn't too far away. My grandma was still in the car at this point in time. And looked around, and eventually found a tipped-over tree and decided, I like rocks. Rocks are cool. And looked down, looking at any particular good-looking ones from my collection. A black one caught my eye, and I took it, and when I stood up, I felt kind of like it was de-reality. That's the only way I can describe it, since it felt exactly as I do when I de-realize. I knew I was in this reality, but something was just very wrong. So I put it down best I could, and how I found it, since it was rather clear that the forest was telling me that it wasn't mine, and I wasn't allowed to keep it. Then everything just kept being wrong. It was blowing wind, but it was only the sound of wind. There was zero movement. There was zero sound within the forest, like it all just froze. And then I felt a sort of feeling I've never felt before. Like whatever that thing I saw earlier was, it was trying its damnedest to trick me. I went to my mom and explained something was trying to trick me, and we decided to leave. We ran into Grandma, and I asked Mom if it really was her. And Mom just said, we'll find out. So, we began walking. Mom had me hold her hand and stay on the path. And we began sort of hearing a crow, but it wasn't a crow. It was like it was trying to mimic a crow, but took breaths in between to cry or scream. We kept walking. I walked a bit ahead. I'm a fast walker and wanted to get out of there, but didn't want to run for obvious reasons. And it just kept getting louder. In the way some creatures get louder the further away they are. It was figuring out where we were through noise and wanted us to make noise. I tried telling my grandma and mom to be quieter, but they refused and kept trying to speak to them. Quite in character for them. That's not odd in the slightest. But it kept going for me specifically to the point that it was directly on top of me. I decided to put away the crow act, or it did, and began mimicking an owl, and I just felt incredibly sick. Like possibly anxiety sick, since I do have an anxiety disorder. Whenever we left the forest, it began mimicking a coyote for some reason, and just kept going, even as we left. Is it normal for black-eyed kids to act like this? I've been visiting my dad for the summer, and the house is incredibly haunted, and immensely polite. The ghosts have amazing manners, even if they're mischievous. And my sisters mentioned a black-eyed blonde boy with bangs, trying to get into the house and get their attention. My stepmom mentioned seeing him, and he just thinks the girls are very pretty and wants to collect them like rocks. He's 10 years old. My stepmom is a badass who makes every spirit her bitch. Like at one point she threatens to purify a demon if it kept acting rude, and that her quote-unquote pagan shit is much more dangerous than that Christian bullshit, and managed to get it to help her with her job. So she did what she normally does. She told him that he's not allowed inside, nor to hurt us. The experiences have since dialed down for me personally. But one of the first few nights, I woke up to a child giggling in my ear and something at the door, and just thought, well, that's very rude of you, and went directly back to sleep. Whenever I'd shower, I felt like somebody was watching me. And so did the girls. And my stepmom told him that he was breaking the rules and was being a perv, and how impolite that was. Well, at one point I was switching my laundry, turned, and saw a little blonde boy with bangs in overalls and a multicolored long-sleeve shirt. He was on the couch. I didn't see his eyes and decided to ignore it, since, well, my mom taught me, if you see something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. Well, a few nights ago, she thought Marigold, the spirit of my possessed doll, she's very friendly since I got her, was just visiting, since she felt a child's ghost in the house. And the littles play, well, I guess their play habits have changed. I responded with, "No, there's a little boy," and explained what I saw. Well, she got mad but just accepted it because he was playing by the rules. Some of my stuff's been going missing, as well as more often. But I just need to ask for it back, and I get it. I've met a black-eyed person before, but what I felt when I met the black-eyed man was pure and unfiltered fear and panic. Even just by passing by him, he terrified me. This kid is just playing with the littles and doesn't seem like much harm. Is this normal? Is there a difference between black-eyed adults and children? Are some people immune to paranormal experience? In parentheses, me. Myself and said coworker were cleaning up the bar and restaurant that we work at. It's late, maybe like 2 a.m., and we're closed. She's toward the back, and I'm in the front. It's just us and our manager in the back room. We're maybe 10 meters apart. There's a big glass panel dividing us, and a doorway to the side. But we can see and hear each other perfectly. We're silently packing chairs away and cleaning tables, and I hear her gasp loudly. I turn around and look at her through the glass and say, "What?" She's just looking around as if she's heard something. "What?" I say again, and she starts saying, "I heard knocking." I'm about to tell her that I didn't hear anything when her eyes shoot up from the glass panel between us and she yells, "Oh my God!" Her eyes are clearly fixed on something moving across the glass. I look upwards where she's looking and I see nothing. I yell again, "What is it?" She looks down at me aghast and says, "Did you really not fucking see that?" She's spooked as hell, and I'm confused. By that time, the manager comes out and asks what the commotion is all about. Coworker says she heard knocking and then saw a shadow move across the glass. I said that I didn't see or hear any of this. She thinks I'm crazy. I think she's crazy. But wait, there are security cameras. As we check the footage, you can hear a distinct knocking before the coworker's gasp. Then, obviously, you see me coming over saying, "What?" And I shit you not, on the security footage, you see a faint shadow move across the glass. As my coworker watches while I look around trying to see what she sees. I didn't see or hear any of this while it was happening, only on the footage. Why could my coworker sense it at all, but I couldn't? how on earth did I not hear and see this when it was happening? But I could on the security and audio video recording. It also reminded me of when I was young. My brother and I walked into a room, and he said he felt a creepy vibe, and it was weird. And I felt nothing. The room felt normal. Are some people immune to paranormal phenomena? Are there some that can see it and some who simply can't? Sixth sense of death. Trigger warning / death warning. I don't know where else to talk about this. Ever since I was a kid, I've been able to sense death. I can see it up close, as in I can look into someone's face and see that they're close to death. I always thought that was kind of interesting because it would happen when I'd meet my friend's parents or family. On more than one occasion, I would look at their face and just see gray, black eyes with major bags underneath them. But then I'd look at pictures of them and see the complete opposite. Next, I'd hear of them either dying of an illness, a car accident, or gun violence. I just figured this was a coincidence. But then as I got older, it became different. It started with my grandmother. She was sick for a while, but one night I looked in the mirror, and it was my face that looked drained, old, sunken. And I'd be tired, unexplainably tired. The next day, I was told that she died. It happened with my father, too. He wasn't even ill, and I was halfway across the world, and it happened again. I was getting ready to go out to another country, and I looked in the mirror, and sure enough, I looked just like I'd emerged from the crypt and felt like I could use a nap. A few hours later, my mom called and told me that he had passed from an aneurysm. This has happened 10 to 15 times that I can remember. I never know who it's going to be, but if it's someone I know, I'll always get that drained look and get extremely tired. I've only ever told my partner. I had to, because it happened one day where I looked so gray and I was so tired that my partner thought I was getting really sick and took me to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, I started to turn around, and sure enough, we got a call letting us know that his friend was murdered at a Toronto nightclub. Anyways, I just want to make sure I'm not crazy and see if anybody else has had the same experience. It sounds wild, but it's never failed. It doesn't scare me anymore, and if anything, I'd like to learn more about it. Midnight Taco Run. A bit of background. My husband and I have been together since the 8th grade. I was 13 and he was 14 in 1997. That, in and of itself, is difficult for people to believe, but we've been together 26 years now, so we know each other pretty well. However, in the beginning, my husband, I'll call him Nick, was closed off about certain things. For instance, he didn't tell me that his mom legally changed his name when he was 5, until we were in college. I knew that his father's side of the family called him by what I thought was his middle name, but I had no idea that they'd been using his original first name. When I asked why, he didn't tell me. He said that he didn't think it was that important. Anyway, I can't remember the first time something paranormal came up, but Nick very reluctantly told me that he could sometimes see things that most couldn't. This astonished me, as I've never thought of him as the type to even believe in the paranormal. But instead, he not only believed, but lived with it on nearly a daily basis. I told him that I believed him and was curious about all the things that he could see. And I asked for him to share his experiences with me as he experienced them. At first, he was uncomfortable doing so, but when he realized that I was genuinely interested and not out to make fun of him, he began opening up about it and sharing almost every time he saw something, unless it was something that he felt he shouldn't acknowledge. So, on to the story. One night in early October, in about 2008 or 2009, we decided to take a midnight snack run to our favorite taco place. I was driving that night, and when I turned onto our neighborhood, on our way home, I saw what I thought was a grayish trash bag blowing in the nearby stop sign at the end of the street. Nick and I had been oddly giggly and having a good time making each other laugh over silly things all night. So it was odd when I asked Nick what that thing on the side of the road was, and he didn't answer. I glanced at him to see if he had heard my question and asked him again, and he still didn't answer me. As we got closer, I noticed that the way that this thing was moving made it look like a large dog. As I pulled up to the stop sign, I could no longer see the thing, as it was on Nick's side of the truck. I looked at Nick again and asked yet another time, what was it while craning my neck trying to see? I said, "Is that a dog?" His attitude had changed completely from just a few seconds earlier. He was no longer smiling, and he was slouched way down in his seat. When I asked if it was a dog, Nick ever so slightly shook his head no with his eyes directly forward. He looked, well, not normal. At this point, I was confused and getting irritated at him for not responding to my question. Then I saw the gray dog thing run away from the truck toward the adjacent yard, and started to wonder why Nick was acting so strange about a dog. I was on the verge of saying something to the effect of, "Nick," when the dog jumped straight up into the air and disappeared. Whatever I was going to say evaporated, and I looked at Nick. He was now shielding his face with his hand in a way that you might do if you were trying to avoid someone seeing you, while whispering frantically, "Please go, please go, please go." Then, to add to the completely bizarre situation unfolding in front of me, a cat from across the street yowled and screamed as it came tearing across the street toward the area I'd seen whatever it was disappear. The cat's tail was 3 times its normal size, and it looked prepared to fight to the death. I said, "What the fuck did I just see?" as I felt every hair on my body stand on end, in a way I'd never experienced before. Nick said dryly, "That was a cat." I floored the truck and said, "I'm not talking about the fucking cat." I was terrified but fascinated by what I'd just witnessed. He still made no reference to the dog thing. After we returned home, I was still freaked out, and Nick was a little paranoid that it might have been following us, and he kept looking out the window. When he felt comfortable again, I asked him what he saw. He was reluctant to say much, but he said that after I saw it disappear, he could still see it. It had been sitting in a tree branch near his window, which had been down the whole time, by the way. It had been looking toward the truck with a rat dog-like face with long, sharp teeth. What I personally saw was a dog-shaped thing. I didn't see its head, so I can't really describe it, but its body and tail looked like it had sharp angles and was a dark, steely gray. It made me think of the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Lady in the Water, that had dog-like creatures called scrunts that were covered in blades of grass. However, when discussing the incident with Nick recently, he recalled that it almost looked as though it were covered with pointed scales, almost like armor. But the most bizarre thing for me was the way that it disappeared. It seemed like it went through an Acme black hole from the Looney Tunes cartoon that was suspended in mid-air. In other words, it was as though my vision into this other dimension was restricted to a finite cube of space. And when it jumped out of that space, it left my scope of perception. While it was jumping, its head was out of the space while its body and tail were still in it. I have no idea if this description makes sense or not. Well, I'm getting it. This experience was bizarre and at the same time incredibly creepy. But when I think about it now, I feel incredibly lucky to not only have been granted a glimpse into something so otherworldly, but to have been able to share that experience with my best friend. Sleeping encounter. I'm cat-sitting at my mom's this week and forgot some personal items at my apartment. My boyfriend and I had made plans for him to come by this morning, before or after his gym, to drop them off. All the doors are locked, and he's got the key to the house. So around 6:45 in my half-asleep state, I hear from quite far someone open the front and my boyfriend's voice saying, "Hello," like he usually does to announce his presence. I was very drowsy and was very much on the edge of being asleep and half asleep. Then I felt him come into my room and give me a quick kiss on the cheek, just like he usually does. That made me fall completely asleep. So approximately an hour passed, and I was pretty much fully awake. I looked at my phone. I start texting my boyfriend, thanking him for dropping off my things and telling him how sweet he is. I start looking for the bag with my belongings in it and can't seem to find it. So I ask him where he dropped it off, and he says, "In my car." I'm like, "What do you mean in your car? You didn't drop it here yet?" So turns out my boyfriend is currently at the gym, and I'm waiting for him while I'm writing this. I'm stunned, shocked, confused. I have no idea how to explain what happened, because I swear on my life I could feel the kiss on my cheek, and I heard his voice say, "Hello," in that very specific little tone that he takes sometimes. I'm a very light sleeper, so I get woken up by pretty much any loud noise around me, and the front door is not the most silent one to open or close. My 2 a.m. paranormal experience with a ghost. First, I want to say that I come from a Muslim family and culture, and I believe that we aren't alone in this world, and that there's other entities, such as jinns, around us, and sometimes they may do some paranormal stuff that can't be rationalized. So with that being said, one time I was about to sleep around 2 a.m., and as I'm doing so, I see the kitchen light suddenly get turned on. At first I thought it was my mom at the kitchen for whatever reason, And then shortly after, I hear plates making noises, as if someone is just fiddling with the plates. At the time, I used to sleep in my parents' bedroom, where my mom sleeps, due to my room being under construction. My dad at the time wasn't in the house, since he was somewhere else for work, so it was pretty much me sleeping in an inflatable bed on the ground, and my mom sleeping on the bed. So as the noises and the light being turned on was happening for about 3 to 5 minutes, then all of a sudden it turned off, and it was complete darkness and silence for a bit. I kept staring at the door, thinking that my mom would come back, and after 1 minute, I grabbed my phone and put on a flashlight, and found my mom still asleep, like she had never left the room. I woke her up and told her what happened, and she was very weirded out about the situation. I pretty much didn't want to go check and just recited the Ayat al-Kursi for protection from such spirits and jinns, and went back to sleep, mainly because I knew it couldn't be a burglar in the house, and no burglar would be stupid enough to go into the kitchen and turn on the lights and make some noticeably loud noises with the plates. Thus, I figured it had to be some sort of ghost paranormal activity. I was always skeptical about such entities, though that turn of events made me believe that there are spirits in this world. We have shortly moved after from that house, for other unrelated reasons. And now, I from time to time do think about the whole situation of it being some sort of spirit in the house, as it cannot really be explained. This just happened, where a ghost just said in my aunt's voice, "Assalamu alaikum." This just happened today, and I'm freaking out. So my grandparents' house is haunted. Pretty much my cousins and I believe it. We've had many experiences where we heard whistling, seen figures, heard noises, had dreams of people that we don't know, or heard mimicking voices. Now, I've never experienced anything till today. So for starters, my uncle, aunt, and cousin went away on a trip recently. My other aunt and other cousin were out as well. My grandmother was downstairs with her headphones on, and she has a hearing problem, so she can't hear us. And my grandfather was also upstairs. He was sleeping. So we often come visit every day, at the same time, because my sister is autistic. So I rang the Ring doorbell because the lock wasn't working, because sometimes it glitches and fixed itself later because of exposure to the sun. So I unlocked the door, and I hear my aunt's voice say, "Assalamu alaikum." So I said the greeting back, but then it clicked for me. My aunt's not here. So, coming from inside the house in my aunt's room, and it was her voice. So I rushed around to see. I called my other aunt and asked if she was here and told her. She told me to ask if my aunt did it through the Ring app. Now keep in mind the Ring is very new, and they never really used it before. So when I called her, she had no idea that she could even do that. So then I started freaking out. I couldn't even say the prayer because I couldn't remember. My aunt called me back and said that she had got it on the recording. I'm not allowed to show it because of privacy and don't have permission, but it's on camera. For the rest of the time, I felt the basement was colder than normal, and I felt too anxious to even go upstairs. I don't know who mimicked my aunt's voice, but for a jinn to say "Assalamu alaikum" like that, I'm hoping it was a good gin. Need help figuring out what happened? There's a trail that's only big enough for select off-road vehicles. The gate is small enough that no vehicle can enter it. We were able to get in on one of the smaller side-by-sides and started the trail. About a mile, the side-by-side I was in needed to stop and use the bathroom. So we fell about a mile behind the lead side-by-side. The driver of mine decided to try and hit a puddle after we started driving again and ended up hitting a stump and flipping over. We were pretty stuffed and half by the side-by-side was nearly crushed, so we couldn't get out. So less than 5 seconds after we stop rolling, these 3 random men in their 20s start pulling us out of the vehicle and helping us. The weird part is they drove a 1980 Chevy Blazer, which is far too big to be able to get onto this trail. Also, we didn't see them behind us at all. This trail is surrounded by trees, and every entrance is only big enough for small off-road vehicles. These 3 men helped us out a few minutes, and those minutes went by, and the 6 of us, 3 in the side-by-side and 3 random men, were working on flipping the side-by-side back over. That's when the other side-by-side got back and helped out. We took a few minutes to talk to each other, and by the time our focus shifted back to the 3 men, their vehicle and them were gone. We didn't hear a vehicle start, and everyone there at the time 100% saw them. The Bayport Experience. Okay, so about 21-ish years ago, my mother was able to buy her first house and got it for a very good price. I remember being quite excited to have my own bedroom, and every day after school, my mom would bring me to our new house while her and my grandmother cleaned up the place. And because I was there, I was able to pick my own room. The room I had chosen had an old Cheerio cabinet with an old creepy doll, an old music box, and a few other broken tools. I asked my mom if I could keep the music box and started to play with it while my mother cleaned. Eventually, my grandmother found an old beaten-up journal, and my mother and her started to read it. I'll never forget the 2 entries. Why did she make me do this? She knows how I get. Why couldn't she have just kept her mouth shut? Entry 2. I miss her every day. I don't think I can go on without her anymore. I only heard these because I had eavesdropped on my mother and grandmother. They decided to get rid of the journal because of how creepy it was. But we eventually moved the book. And that's when the weirdest thing started to happen. My family were convinced that the house might be haunted, but nothing directly was happening until they did. Encounter number 1. I was watching TV, the pilot episode of Ned's Declassified School Survivor Guide, when something strange started to happen on my TV. The volume went super high and my remote stopped working. My brother and stepdad ran in, and the channel started to change as the volume got louder. My stepdad said something about it being a deaf ghost. Then the volume went to mute, and followed by the power going out completely. My stepdad looked at the breaker box and could find nothing wrong with it. Encounter 2. My brother and his friend were playing on the computer and started to hear strange noises. They went to investigate and heard the sound of a train. We lived very far away from the train stations, like there was no possible way that we could have heard them. But then they said a red-haired girl standing in the living room. When they turned back, she was gone. Encounter 3. I was sitting in the dining room alone. My brother was in his room, getting ready for our grandmother to pick us up and take us to the pool club. When I started eating, I felt something odd, and my chair legs broke. As I slammed on the ground, I saw a black, shadowy figure. My brother and my dog ran toward me, and he got freaked out. Again, my stepdad looked over for what was wrong, and he said it looked like the legs were kicked in. Bad things started to occur. I got extremely sickly and nearly died. But after leaving the house, the bad energy followed. We had misfortune in every house we moved into after that. House 1, black mold, aka Stachybotrys. House 2, landlord forgot to promise our house to his in-laws. Or he forgot that he had promised the house to his in-laws. House 3, electrical issues nearly burned down the place. My brother had realized one of our blankets was in his closet when he had first moved into the Bayport house. He begged my parents to get rid of it. So, one night when we were at a camping trip, my mother dropped the blanket in the fire. And everything seemed to get better, albeit slowly. And here's the crazy thing. The music box was stolen by my cousin when I was 10. Still living in the house at the time. And, well, nothing but bad things started happening to him that eventually led to his death. But here's a few strange notes about that house. There was a stain on the maroon kitchen walls. It wasn't until I was older did I realize that that kind of stain only shows up if she painted over blood. 2. The previous owner of the house reported his girlfriend as missing, not dead. Claimed she ran away after a fight. 3. The realtor who sold my mother the house said the girl died in a car accident, but there was a large blood stain on her dining room wall. 4. There was a crawl space we could never access. We were never given the key. But if you went into the basement area where the crawl space would logically lead to, there was a door that was sealed away with black electrical tape, with pipes built over it. My stepfather and his own father looked it over and realized the pipes didn't connect to anything. One last weird note. When I was playing while my mother and grandmother were cleaning the house before we moved it, I saw something very strange. A shirtless child chasing a dog. Now at the time, we didn't have a dog, but a year later, we got my first dog, and she had stolen my shirt while I was getting dressed. Chased her and realized as I did, I had seen the exact same thing a year earlier. The Ghost Cat, a night I can't forget. Years ago, around a decade back, my friend and I were part of the same Marine Corps Reserve unit. The distance to our unit from my place was a good 2.5 hours. One particular day, we were required to report early. To save time, we decided I'd stay at his place, situated halfway between my home and the drill center. After a night of barracks cuts and a couple of beers, my friend, looking a bit troubled, confided me about an unusual problem with the house that he was renting. He believed it was haunted by a ghost. Being a skeptic, couldn't help but tease him. But his response was not what I expected. He looked straight into my eyes and uttered, "It's a damn cat." He recounted incidents where he'd wake up to see the cat lounging outside his bedroom, each time he would leap out of the bed to catch it. But by the time he'd reached the doorway, just 5 to 7 feet away, it would vanish. I laughed it off, attributing it to his imagination, and decided to crash on the living room couch. The stillness of the night was interrupted when I felt something brushing against my hand, which dangled off the couch. As I peered down, I was met with the sight of a cat affectionately rubbing its head against my hand. Panic set in as I realized I was paralyzed. The dreaded sleep paralysis. While my body was immobile, my willpower drove me to make a tiny movement. In a desperate attempt to prove its existence, I managed to grip that cat's face with my index finger, trying to nick my finger on its sharp tooth. Suddenly, the cat wrenched free and started straight through to the living room wall. The moment its tail disappeared, the paralysis lifted. Frantically, I inspected my finger. While there was no visible injury, I could faintly feel where the tooth had pressed against it, and there seemed to be a slight discoloration. The next day, still bewildered, I narrated the previous night's events to my friend. I may never know the truth of that night, but part of me is convinced that I held onto a ghostly feline, even if just for a fleeting moment. The most uncanny thing? It behaved just like any ordinary cat. Have you ever walked into something invisible? Okay, I know how this sounds, but this is a serious question. About 15 years ago, I was getting ready for bed. Turned off all the lights, one by one. The light in my bedroom was on, so I was turning off all the other lights and going into my room. I picked up my cat like a baby and turned off the last light in the living room. It was a straight shot to my bedroom with nothing obstructing the way. As I was passing my couch with my cat in my arms, I bounced off of something that wasn't there. Like, literally. Imagine someone walking directly into a wall, but the wall is invisible. Even stranger, the moment I collided with whatever it was, I got a rushing wave of heat all through my body, starting from my toes to my head, and then immediately an ice-cold chill from the top of my head all the way down to my toes. My cat reacted with a long, stressed-sounding meow, indicating that he sensed something was off as well. I've never had this happen again since. I was just wondering if anyone else out there had something similar happen. It scared me. So much that I slept with the lights on for the better part of 2 weeks. So, there's this mausoleum. This was many years ago now, but this place is imprinted into my memory. It was a mausoleum and cemetery within walking distance of my apartment in New Jersey. I had a few experiences with that place, but the creepiest one was the day I walked past it, and it was open. FYI, I walked past this place a lot and lived in that apartment for a few years, and only saw it open this one time. So I'm walking by one afternoon, and I notice the sign is out stating, quote-unquote, visiting hours. Never saw it open before, so I decided to check it out. Even though a couple of the other experiences had already happened outside of here, I figured I'd set my mind at ease. Spoiler, I didn't. So I walk in. The first thing I see is a very long marble-floored hallway with drawers in the walls. Expected. Unexpected were the strange gated parlor chairs that were sort of tables behind wrought iron gates, spaced every so often, Then I heard footsteps. You know how footsteps and shoes can echo on hardwood floor, or hard floor in general? So I say, "Hello," and nothing. Footsteps get louder, so I loudly say, "Hello?" No response. The sound of footsteps is loud enough to sound like it's right around the corner. At this point, with no reply, I'm out. Honestly, had enough weird things happen to me by this place and totally didn't want to see what was making the sound. I went past that place many times after that day. For a while around the same time, it was never open again. I saw something and I can't stop thinking about it. I work the third shift. I go to many different locations and clean. One of the locations I go to has deers and bunnies. I've encountered deer before, and I know to keep my distance. Toward the end of my shift, which is around 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., my coworker and I are in charge of taking out the trash. Next to this location is like a field with trees next to a park. In this area, it's always foggy in the morning. It's close to a river. We begin to bring the trash to the back of the building, where the dumpsters are. I was next to the dumpster, ready to lift my huge bag of trash, but something just told me to look. I turned to my right, and across the street is a very tall, extremely skinny deer with huge antlers. While I stared at it, I couldn't stop thinking, what's wrong with its knees? Its knees were just so huge compared to the thin leg bones. This deer was extremely tall, and it began to walk towards my coworker and I. Its leg was so long, it wasn't moving correctly. The legs were just too long. Then another one appeared next to the first one. Due to the fog, they looked gray, not cream or brown, but this grayish color. Their eyes were glowing, and they just stared at us. I no longer wanted to look at these things, but my body kept telling me to look. I was afraid they were getting to charge, or maybe attack us. I turned to run, and my coworker was already running toward the door. They didn't make any sound. These deer were extremely quiet. Something just wasn't right with these deer. They gave me an uncanny feeling. These deers were well over 6 feet tall. Saw a ghost. Years ago, I had the following experience. My boyfriend and I at the time had watched a film, and he said I'll take it back to the rental place, which was down the road from my house. It was late afternoon and my parents were home. While he was returning the rental film, I was waiting in the porch and looking at the house across the road, where a boy had lived and died in a car accident a month before. The boy had been about 14 when he died. I was looking into the house and thinking about him when I saw a figure appear slowly in the front window of the house. I could see a figure wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and could see a head but no facial features. Just a pink kind of mottled face. Then the figure began to vibrate side to side, which was fairly frightening to see. I was of course shocked and scared. I turned back into the house, and my mom said, "What's the matter?" I told her I saw something strange, and told my boyfriend also. I don't think they believed me, but I saw it for sure. I feel still to this day kind of amazed and in awe of what it is that I saw. Feel honored really to have witnessed it. I've only told 4 or 5 people. Sort of felt that I would maybe get looked at as being strange. I was about 20 years old at the time. I'm now 48, and still remember it clear as day. Was this a skinwalker, or demon, or something else? This is something that I experienced about 4 or 5 years ago. I had some friends over from out of town, a few. We were talking about paranormal experiences that we had in the past. During the conversation, we experienced a few odd things. At first, it was just a lot of loud walking upstairs. We were home alone, and it wasn't any of us. That part wasn't very weird to me. My family and I had already believed the spirit of the previous owner was still in the house. We had a lot of experience with her, and a neighbor had told us that she died in the garage of the house. But as we continued with their stories, one of my friends saw what looked like a large black bird flying up my staircase. When we checked, we didn't see anything there. But since we all had our own personal reasons to believe in the paranormal, we decided that this was a sign to stop and change the subject. After that thing settled down, my friend left the next day and went home. A few days after the friends had left, I woke up in the middle of the night. I think it was some time after midnight. And as I would normally do, I went downstairs, got some water from the garage. When I grabbed the water from the pack, I looked up, and very close to me, I saw a figure standing there. It was very clear. It stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its arms, legs, and torso looked like a very muscular man. Its head looked like a massive wolf. Its skin and fur was black like charcoal. As soon as I saw it, I bolted back into the house, locked the garage, and went straight to my room. The energy coming off of it was utterly terrifying. It's the only paranormal experience I've had that I actually felt like I was in real danger. I did move from that house a year ago, but still to this day, I've yet to have anyone able to give me a solid ID on what it is that I saw. Personally, I think it was either a demon or a skinwalker. I know there is a Native American reservation not far from the house. Additionally, just outside of the neighborhood, there was a decent-sized plot of empty land that was owned by the Air Force. My family and I had seen 2 massive coyotes, bigger than anyone in my family's ever seen, just wandering the neighborhood. I know this sounds like something out of a movie, and I don't have any pictures or videos to back up my experience, but for what it's worth, I promise this is what I experienced. My first encounter with a friendly spirit. It was the summer of 2009. My family and I had just moved into our new home, and not long after, weird things would happen from time to time. My room is located at the end of a narrow hallway, and back then, my sister and I would share my room. The idea behind paranormal things always scared me senseless. But because I've never experienced anything related to that myself, I was a little skeptic, but I still believed in it a little. At the time, I was 11 years old, and my sister and I were in bed, about to go to sleep. I don't know how long I had my eyes shut, but I believe at the time my sister had already fallen asleep. She was on the right side of the bed that was adjacent to the wall, while I was on the left side that was open to the rest of the room. I was sleeping with my right arm hanging over the side of the bed, facing away from my sister, when all of a sudden I heard a whisper near my ear saying my name. I thought nothing of it since it was maybe just me being pretty sleepy at the time. But then my arm started to lift up. This woke me up and I just slowly pulled my arm back toward me, because I knew that you weren't supposed to get scared because they feed off of that energy, and to just simply ignore it. Don't get me wrong, I was freaking out internally, but I played it cool, and I just scooted closer to my sister and forced myself to go to sleep. Even though I was scared, and in general I get scared very quickly, I didn't feel like it was a bad spirit. Maybe it could have been a loved one of the previous family, or someone else that lived in our home and just wanted to let us know that they were here. Who knows? Anyway, that was my first experience, but definitely not the last. My sister, along with a few relatives who would stay with us for a certain time, also experienced things, if you'd like to hear more about that. Ask Reddit. I haven't experienced it directly, but my sister and I shared a room when we were children. When she was maybe 6 years old, making me 12 at the time, there were a few weeks where she would wake up in the middle of the night absolutely terrified. When asked about it, she said that an older lady she doesn't know stood next to her bed, threatening to kill her if she didn't return. Or rather, didn't return her daughter to her. My sister said that this lady's appearance was usually preceded by a dream. In this dream, she saw the woman and her daughter chased and killed by a group of men. This was dismissed by her parents, but I saw how she was getting more and more scared as time went on. This wasn't a nightly occurrence, but regular enough for me to become concerned and tell my sister to wake me up the next time that it happened. At this point, it should be noted that we have bunk beds. When my sister woke me up on the next occasion, I was pretty frightened myself, as her fear was quite genuine. Still, I looked over the side of the bed, where my sister said the woman was standing previously. I can confirm that I did not see a thing, for which I remain thankful, and did my best to explain this apparent apparition that my sister is very sorry to see what she had experienced. Confusing. But that there was nothing that could do except offer our condolences and ask that she please not scare my sister anymore. My sister said that the lady was listening. I felt like an utter fool in the morning, but my sister said that she never saw the lady again, which is all I wanted out of it anyway. Ask Reddit. This was a few years ago. Was in the car with my mom on the way home from visiting a friend. It was winter in Canada, so there was a ton of snow. Driving is hard. The car ends up getting stuck in the snow. For those who don't know, it's extremely difficult to get a car out of the snow because the wheels would lose grip and just keep spinning. Often you need to get a tow truck, tie chains, put it all on the wheels, put wooden planks down, or have at least 3 strong guys to push the car, or all the above. As my mom and I were figuring out what to do, as we had nothing to get the car unstuck, I see a girl standing about 10 feet away. She must have been crossing the road and noticed us. The thing is, I didn't see her walk up to us. She looked to be in her maybe early 20s. She just looked like a normal person, with dark shoulder-length hair. Was wearing black winter clothes. She had on a backpack as well. She signaled that she was going to try pushing the car from behind. We nod. My mom tries driving, but no luck. My mom said, "Go out and help her push the car." As I went to unbuckle my seatbelt, the car went forward as if there was no snow at all. And as I said before, it doesn't just get unstuck that easy. As we drove, we both turned to wave and thank the girl, but she was gone. There's nowhere she could have gone in such a short amount of time. And to be honest, there's no way that she could have pushed that vehicle by herself out of the snow. We haven't seen her since. And I always wonder who or what she was. Ask Reddit. 1. Big man. When I was younger, like 5 to 7, I would often talk about a black shadow that I could see on my walls. I called him Big Man. My total memory of the events are very faded, but the only memorable moments I can recall is 1. When my old stepdad was getting on to me one night for not going to bed, and he stood in my doorway. I said to him, "Big man is gonna get you," and he went running away. Apparently, my parents were terrified of this shadow. 2. It felt like a normal day for a kid, because my mom and Mima just took me to the park. It turned into an ambush, though, and apparently they wanted to talk about this shadow that I would see and that I would talk to. They asked if I felt like it was evil, and I was like, no. He makes me feel safe. I don't remember a lot of what we talked about, only that it was serious enough that they wanted to take me out of the house to talk about it. 3. I hadn't seen Big Man in years, since around 7 or 8, and moving away from that house that I lived in at the time, until one day when my mom had gotten remarried, and we were living with my mom and my now stepdad. We lived in a trailer in the woods, and we had no neighbors, and I would often go play outside. One day I stepped out onto the porch and saw a giant black shadow beside a tree. It was as if it had sucked me into it. However, this overwhelming sense of dread and fear sank into me as I couldn't look away. I ended up praying to God to help me, and I finally could look away. I ran away into the bathroom after that, and the memories of the Big Man came back to my then teenage self. UFO. This happened to not just me, but my best friend as well. We were young, angsty teens with family problems and relationship issues to boot. We often talked deeply to one another, and our friendship was rich. One night, when we were about 15 or 16, we were just ending a deep conversation that we were having, but being as it was 2 a.m., we were lying in the middle of the road. Super dangerous, I know, but it was a small town, and you could hear and see in both directions quite a ways, so we didn't really, care at the time. And we didn't really care if we got ran over anyway. Back to the story. We were laying there in a solemn silence when a giant blue light came above us. About 1,000 feet or so, zero noise. It hovered, stayed still for 3 seconds, and then instantly zoomed away up beyond eyesight. After a half second passed, he popped up and was like, "Did you see that?" I was like, "Hell yes, I did." And we went running off toward the house, scared shitless. To this day, no one believes us and thinks that we were just foolish stoners. We weren't high then. Ask Reddit. Moving into my old house, we always felt off in the basement. My ex-wife would feel as if she's being watched, or I felt as if I couldn't breathe. The door at the top of the stairs leaned inwards and was always opening from gravity. The doorknob broke off, and it was a super old door, so couldn't get a replacement. But every so often, as I would leave the basement, the door would slam shut as soon as I neared it. The old man that lived there long ago liked woodworking, and so there were a lot of shelves down there. I used them all, like 8 or 9. But needed more, and searched around his storage shed, just not finding anything. Then would randomly find another shelf underneath the workbench where the others had been. Ended up with like 13 shelves. My friend would see a men's shadow walking in our kitchen. When we would sit outside at the fire and no one was inside, he would see what looked like a man in the kitchen. One night, while upstairs sleeping, I needed to pee. It was like 3 a.m. As I rolled over, I noticed that my white shorts with those big plastic beads from the 80s and 90s that kids made jewelry with. She had curly blonde hair and blue eyes, but she was glowing white. Her arms outstretched, and she was just looking at me. That's when I noticed behind her shadows, mostly shapeless, some animal-like. They were black or really dark purple with a purple aura and purple eyes. They did not look friendly. We were almost trying to get out, but couldn't get past her. I couldn't talk. I just rolled back over and rolled the blanket over my head and held in my pee. For a little context on the girl, when I was a baby, my mom brought me to see her cousin and his daughter. This ghost girl looked like the pictures I've seen of this cousin. She was murdered very shortly after we had been there. Then, a few years after that, in my nerd room, I had this Funko in the top corner on the shelf that a couple times just flew off toward me. The only window in the room was behind me, so that was odd. Also had a picture hung above a door fall off and onto the other side of the door. Sure, it could have bounced out, but you have to slide the picture up, all the way up the wall really, to release the nail that it was on. In that same room, I had fallen asleep on my couch. I had been dreaming that I was being choked, and it woke me up, gasping for air but struggling. I was unable to move or anything. I noticed on my chest this small animal-like shadow thing, like the ones in the closet. It was shapeless, but also animal-like, almost a cat shape. It was black or just dark purple with purple aura and eyes. Its shadowy figure formed like fangs in its open mouth, like a hissing cat. Angry looking. As soon as it realized I was looking at it, it darted off to the corner, disappearing into the rest of the shadows. I was immediately able to breathe again. I turned the lights on, back to sleep till the sun came up. That was the last time the shadow thing was there that I saw. Ex-wife said some prayers. The old man in the basement still liked to mess with me, but I've since moved out. Texted my college girlfriend at like 3 a.m. after waking up from a weird dream about her talking about me and something that she needed help with. She texted back shortly after saying that her and her grandma had been talking about me a few minutes before my texts. When I was 7, I was up in me and my brother's bedroom playing with Legos. Everyone else was downstairs in the kitchen or family room, waiting for dinner, and probably watching TV. I got this weird feeling all of a sudden that something was in the room with me and I needed to bolt. Just overwhelming fight or flight rush and the sense that a threat was coming from the closet. I jumped up and started booking it, ran through the bedroom door, down the little hallway to the stairs. I skipped steps, and I was just so fearful. I had just reached the edge of the stairs and was turning the corner and seeing everybody down there. Right then I realized that I couldn't make out any noise. No screams, no yelling, nothing coming out of my mouth. Everything slowed down the moment that I could see my parents and siblings. Then I felt like something had grabbed me, something I cannot even describe. Slowly, I was pulled backwards, doing everything I could to make a noise or fight free. Nothing happened. I was frozen. Then a rush of being pulled back up the stairs quickly, down the hallway into my room. Everything happened at an accelerated fashion. Last thing I remember is seeing the door slam in front of me. Next thing I know, I'm walking down the stairs slowly and getting to my parents and asking them why they didn't help me or check on me. They told me that I thought I was just playing a game upstairs. I still question what happened then. Was it a weird dream? Did an alien abduct me? Was this some sort of ghost or demon? I don't remember what happened. If anything, once I was pulled back into the room, but the sense and image, or reaching my family, and safely slowing down to a moment of stillness, to then being pulled into the room so fast that I couldn't even blink. This has me open to all kinds of things about the world and the universe, and what they could hold. There's a trail in the South Carolina in the Jones Gap Park. It's called Hospital Rock, and I haven't been there in 20 years. But I hiked it a couple of times alone. It was little visited because it was somewhat difficult compared to the rest of the trails there. So the first time I went, I rounded one corner, came out into this part of the trail that was basically a ridge with a drop off to the side. I got the strangest feeling that I wasn't alone. And yes, I said the. That's what they wrote. Hiking alone, you can get the heebie-jeebies sometimes. But I've been alone enough in weird places that I can tell the difference between heebie-jeebies and a real feeling. This was a matter of fact, gut feeling. First thought, an animal is around. No prob. Finished my hike. But went back a couple weeks later, again alone. And I really couldn't remember just where on the trail I had felt it. But sure enough, I rounded a bend not unlike others on the trail, and there it was. You could cut it with a knife. So I decided to take my then best friend there, and I was careful to avoid telling him what I felt, or where, and asked him to please let me know if he got a vibe. And sure as shit, same place. He stopped and said, "What the fuck?" I couldn't believe it, but he and I both picked it up. Never went back. Just because I got the sense that I was intruding. Apparently the Native Americans in that area used the trail to head to the Hospital Rock itself, which is a jutting rock with lots of room underneath it. They took injured people there, hence its name. Never heard anyone else talk about it. But it's hella haunted by something, and I got too much respect to go where I shouldn't be.